The night pressed down on me like a held breath, the kind that makes your chest ache before you even realize you are afraid. Rain streaked the windows of the old guest house, turning the city lights outside into trembling veins of gold, and I remember thinking that this was how my life felt at that moment, blurred, uncertain, stretched thin by circumstances I never planned. I had come here with nothing but a small bag, a tired heart, and the stubborn hope that tomorrow might be kinder than yesterday, and I did not know that this night, in a room too small for distance, would quietly change the direction of everything. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that small moments can transform entire lives, take a second right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel, The Kindness Chronicles, so stories like this can keep reaching hearts that are still learning how to heal. I had met her earlier that evening under circumstances that felt accidental, but later revealed themselves as necessary. A delayed bus, a missed connection, and a storm that refused to calm had pushed both of us into the same aging guest house on the edge of the city. The place smelled faintly of damp wood and old paint, and the narrow hallways carried every sound as if they wanted witnesses. We were strangers bound by inconvenience, two tired souls looking for shelter rather than connection. I was carrying the weight of a recent failure that still burned in my chest, the kind that leaves you questioning your worth, your choices, and whether you are falling behind in a race everyone else seems to be winning. She carried her own quiet burdens, visible in the careful way she moved and the guarded calm in her eyes, as if she had learned that life could take things away without warning. The problem revealed itself when the owner, apologetic and exhausted, explained that a booking error had left only one room available. There were no other hotels nearby, the roads were flooding, and leaving meant risking the night outside. The room was small, practical, and honest about its limitations, with walls that seemed to lean inward and a single bed placed at its center like a truth neither of us could avoid. She stated the obvious reality of the space with a firmness that suggested boundaries built from experience, and I answered with a nervous attempt at reassurance that was less about the bed and more about survival, about sharing what little comfort the night allowed. There was no romance in that moment, only the awkward awareness of proximity and the unspoken agreement that respect would matter more than convenience. As the door closed behind us, the silence became a character of its own. Rain drummed steadily against the window, and the dim yellow light revealed the exhaustion written on both our faces. I busied myself with small movements, placing my bag down, staring at the floor, pretending that the room was larger than it was. Inside, my thoughts were loud and unkind, reminding me of how far I felt from the life I once imagined. I had lost my job weeks earlier, a quiet dismissal that left no room for protest, and with it went my confidence and my sense of direction. I had told no one how scared I was, how each night felt longer than the last, how the future looked like a foggy road with no signs. Standing there, sharing space with a stranger, I felt exposed in a way that went deeper than physical closeness. Time moved slowly, measured by the ticking of an old clock somewhere in the building and the rise and fall of our breathing. We spoke little, choosing instead to exist alongside each other with cautious courtesy. Yet even without words, stories leaked into the room. I could sense her tension soften as minutes passed, the way she sat on the edge of the bed with her shoulders slowly lowering, the way her gaze drifted from the walls to the window as if searching for reassurance in the storm. In that shared quiet, something subtle began to shift. The room stopped feeling like a trap and started to feel like a pause, a brief intermission in lives that had been moving too fast and hurting too deeply. As the night deepened, the power flickered once, plunging us into darkness before returning with a tired hum. That brief blackout felt symbolic, a reminder of how fragile stability can be, and it stirred something in me. I realized how rarely I allowed myself to be vulnerable, how often I hid behind humor or silence to avoid admitting fear. Being there, stripped of distractions, I felt the weight of my own loneliness. I thought about the people who had drifted away when life became inconvenient, about promises that faded under pressure, about the quiet belief that maybe I was meant to face things alone. Yet the presence of another human being in that small room challenged that belief without saying a word. The bed became the center of an unspoken negotiation, not of space but of trust. We arranged ourselves with care, leaving room where room barely existed, respecting invisible lines drawn by mutual understanding. The mattress creaked softly, and the sheets smelled of detergent and something older, like memories embedded in fabric. I lay there staring at the ceiling, watching shadows move as cars passed outside, my mind replaying past mistakes and imagined futures. At the same time, I felt an unexpected calm, a sense that I was not entirely alone in my uncertainty. Her breathing, steady and real, grounded me in the present moment in a way I had not felt in a long time. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by thoughts and the occasional thunder rolling in the distance. In those half-dream states, memories surfaced of childhood nights when sharing a bed meant safety, not awkwardness, when closeness was natural and comforting. I woke at one point to the sound of rain easing, the storm finally losing its grip on the city. Dawn was still far away, but the darkness felt less heavy, as if the night had spent its fury and left behind something softer. I sensed her stirring too, a shared wakefulness that did not require explanation. Morning arrived quietly, with pale light slipping through the curtains and illuminating dust in the air like tiny stars. The room looked different in daylight, smaller but warmer, less intimidating. The storm had washed the city clean, and the silence that followed felt like a promise. We prepared to leave with the same politeness we had maintained all night, but there was something else now, an unspoken recognition that we had shared more than just space. We had shared a moment of trust in a world that often discourages it, a moment of kindness rooted in necessity but grown into something meaningful. As we stepped out into the fresh morning air, our paths diverged, but the impact of that night lingered. I walked away feeling lighter, not because my problems had vanished, but because I had been reminded of my capacity to connect, to respect, to offer and receive humanity even in uncomfortable situations. That single bed had held more than two tired bodies. It had held fear, hope, boundaries, and the quiet courage it takes to believe that there can be room for both understanding and vulnerability in our lives. In the days that followed, I noticed changes in myself. I spoke more honestly with people, admitted when I was struggling, and accepted help without shame. I approached opportunities with less bitterness and more openness, remembering that night as proof that not all unexpected situations end badly. Sometimes they teach us exactly what we need to learn. I never saw her again, but she remained a gentle presence in my memory, a reminder that kindness does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it simply shares the space it has and asks nothing in return. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of a moment when a stranger's presence made a difficult time easier, please take a moment now to like the video, share it with someone who might need encouragement, and subscribe to The Kindness Chronicles, so more stories like this can continue to spread warmth and hope. And before this story ends, I have a special request for you. Go to the comments and write this line exactly as it is. there is always room for kindness. Your words might be the light someone else needs tonight. The night cracked open like a storm without thunder, the kind that presses against the chest before the rain ever falls. And when she finally said she could not hold it in anymore and that she was coming out, the world seemed to tilt, as if gravity itself paused to listen. I remember the way the streetlight outside flickered, how the ceiling fan hummed like a tired witness, and how something ancient and fragile inside both of us broke free at the same time. In that instant, I understood that some truths are heavier than secrets, and some secrets are heavier than love. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and quiet courage, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who might need hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel The Kindness Chronicles so more stories like this can find the people who need them most. We had known each other since we were young enough to believe that the world was fair if you were patient and honest. We grew up under the same sky that taught us to keep our heads down and our hearts guarded, where tradition felt like a locked door and fear was the key everyone carried. She was the kind of person who laughed softly, as if afraid of taking up too much space, and I was the kind who listened too much, learning early that silence could be a shield. Our lives ran parallel for years, close enough to touch but never colliding, until the day her eyes held a storm she could no longer contain. The challenge did not arrive all at once. It crept in like a shadow stretching longer each evening. I noticed the weight she carried in the way she hesitated before smiling, the way she watched people instead of joining them, the way she flinched at careless jokes that cut deeper than anyone realized. She was fighting a war no one else could see, a battle between who she was and who the world demanded she be. I struggled too, caught between my instinct to protect and my fear of what protection might cost us both. In a place where whispers could ruin lives, love often learned to hide. Days turned into weeks, and the air around us thickened with unsaid words. I felt helpless watching her fade into herself, knowing that honesty was the medicine and the poison. When she finally reached the edge of herself, it was not dramatic in the way movies pretend. It was quiet, exhausted, and devastatingly human. The truth poured out not as a performance, but as a surrender. She was not asking for applause or permission. She was asking for air. And in that moment, I chose to become the space where she could breathe. Saying it would be our little secret was not about hiding her truth. It was about buying her time. Time to heal, time to stand stronger, time to choose her own moment. Yet that promise carried its own weight. Secrets demand vigilance, and vigilance can erode the soul. I learned what it meant to listen without fixing, to guard without controlling, to love without ownership. Every gathering became a test, every conversation a tightrope. I watched her smile through pain and wondered if silence was saving her or slowly drowning us both. The world outside did not soften just because our hearts had opened. Prejudice remained loud, ignorance careless, and danger real. I saw how easily kindness could turn into cruelty when difference appeared. My own struggle grew as I questioned my role, my courage, my limits. There were nights I lay awake imagining a future where she could walk freely, and mornings when fear convinced me that dreaming was reckless. Still, change has a way of beginning in the smallest places, and ours began with trust. As months passed, something subtle shifted. She started to stand taller, her laughter grew steadier, and her eyes carried less apology. The secret did not shrink her, it strengthened her. Watching that transformation taught me that truth, even when hidden, has a way of healing from the inside out. I learned that allyship is not loud declarations but consistent presence, not grand gestures but everyday loyalty. Together, We built a quiet sanctuary in a noisy world. The turning point came not with an announcement, but with a choice. She chose herself in a room where fear once ruled. She chose honesty in her own time, with her own voice. The aftermath was not easy. Some doors closed, some hearts resisted, and some nights were heavy with tears. But others opened unexpectedly. Compassion appeared where we least expected it, and love proved more resilient than hatred. I realized then that secrets are sometimes bridges, not prisons, and that coming out is not a single moment but a lifelong journey. By the end, the story was no longer about secrecy, but about courage rippling outward. Her truth inspired others to question their silence, to soften their judgments, to listen. It reminded me that protecting someone does not mean keeping them hidden forever, but walking beside them until they can walk on their own. The world did not change overnight, but a corner of it did, and that was enough to keep believing. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you love or a truth you are still holding, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to the Kindness Chronicles so these stories can continue to light small fires of hope. And before you go, leave a comment line below with your thoughts, your prayers, or a simple message of support, because sometimes a few kind words are the courage someone else needs to finally breathe. The night she arrived, the rain fell like it was trying to wash guilt out of the streets, and I remember thinking that some storms don't come from the sky. They come to settle old accounts. The doorbell rang once, sharp and uncertain, and when I opened the door, there she stood with soaked hair clinging to her face, eyes heavy with a responsibility that did not belong to her. In that moment, before she even spoke, I felt the weight of a past I had tried to bury rise up and demand to be acknowledged. Before we go any further, pause with me for just a second. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet power of compassion that changes lives, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel, The Kindness Chronicles. Stories like this exist because people like you still believe goodness matters. Years earlier, my father had been a man who trusted too easily and gave too much to the wrong people. His generosity was not loud or proud. It was clumsy and hopeful, the kind that believed doing the right thing would always come back around. When he lent money to her father during a desperate time, it was not a contract that bound them but a handshake and a shared belief that dignity was worth protecting. Life, however, had other plans. Illness took my father slowly, draining not only his strength but our savings as well. And when he passed, the debt remained unpaid, a silent shadow in our home that reminded me of promises unfinished. I carried that bitterness quietly, convincing myself that survival required hardness, that compassion was a luxury for those who could afford disappointment. She told me why she was there without dramatics or excuses. Her father was gone too, taken suddenly by a stroke that left their family with nothing but apologies and unpaid obligations. She had sold what little she owned, taken jobs that bruised her hands and pride, and traveled hours just to stand on my doorstep. She did not come asking for mercy. She came carrying responsibility like a burden she refused to set down. As she spoke, I noticed how her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from exhaustion. This was not a woman looking for escape. This was someone trying to stand upright in a world that kept pushing her down. I surprised both of us when I told her she could stay. The words left my mouth before my defenses could stop them, shaped by something deeper than logic. The house had been empty since my father's death, filled with echoes that made nights unbearable. Offering her a place to stay felt reckless and strangely right, as if the house itself had been waiting for someone who could breathe life back into its walls. She hesitated, pride fighting gratitude, but exhaustion eventually won. That night, as she slept in the spare room, I sat alone in the living room, listening to the rain fade and wondering whether kindness was about to cost me more than I could afford. Living together was not easy. The debt hung between us like a third presence, silent but always felt. She woke before sunrise every day, working multiple jobs and refusing comfort, as if rest itself were a form of betrayal. I struggled with resentment, catching myself calculating how long it would take before the debt was repaid, how quickly I could return to my carefully controlled solitude. Yet small moments began to chip away at that armor. She cleaned the house not out of obligation but respect, cooked meals that reminded me of family, and treated my father's memory with a reverence that startled me. In her quiet routines, I saw not obligation but honor, and it unsettled everything I thought I knew about strength. The real challenge came when life tested us again, as it always does when things begin to soften. I lost my job during a sudden round of layoffs, and panic crept back into my chest like an old enemy. Pride urged me to hide the truth, but she noticed the change in my silence, the way I lingered too long over unpaid bills. Without asking, she increased her hours, came home later, and placed part of her earnings on the table each week, not as payment, but as partnership. Watching her shoulder a burden that was never hers broke something open inside me. I realized then that debt was not just about money. It was about how fear can be repaid with trust, and how loss can be answered with presence. As months passed, the house transformed. Laughter returned softly at first, then more freely. We shared stories of our fathers, discovering similarities in their quiet kindness and flawed courage. In honoring their mistakes, we learned how deeply they had loved. The debt shrank on paper, but something larger grew between us, an understanding that we were both survivors of promises made with good intentions and broken by fate. I stopped seeing her as someone who owed me, and began seeing her as someone who chose to stay, even when leaving would have been easier. The day the debt was finally repaid should have felt like closure, but instead it felt like the beginning of a terrifying question. She stood there with the final amount, eyes steady but uncertain, ready to walk away because responsibility told her it was time. I looked around the house, at the walls that no longer echoed, at the quiet warmth that had replaced grief, and I understood that kindness, once given, demands courage to continue.